Today's message will be titled God and Money. I have a lot of verses, so I printed them out for myself. If you like, I can share the verses with you later on. We should begin with the overarching issue of our attitude towards money. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." You've heard the famous saying probably, that show me your checkbook and I'll tell you how faithful you are. How you spend your money shows a lot about where you are with God and how much you trust Him and where He is in your life. And that stems from the understanding of money. Whose money is it? Well, if we're believers, Christian understanding of money is, I'll share 3 verses with you. Start from Psalm 24:1. "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and all who live in it belong to the Lord." Proverbs 22 says, "Rich and the poor have this in common. God made them both." 1 Corinthians 4:6 we read, "What do you have that you did not receive?" Everything we have is given to us. Well, you might say, well, you know what? I studied hard. I went to school. You know, as my friends were playing soccer, I studied my homework, and I got my degree and I got a good job. Well, good for you. Who enabled you to do that? There are certain families that cannot send their kids to college. You were able to go to college. Well, or you can say, well, I didn't go to college, but I worked hard, I learned a trade, and now I do this and that. Okay? Who gave you that ability? Who opened those doors for you? So for us to think that we did all this just by ourselves is not realistic. And that is the pinpoint of understanding who all this belongs to. Now, if a person is not a believer, this message is not for them, because they will not agree with the fact that this is not everything belongs to God. They will say, I did it. This is a live, let live, dog eat dog world, survival of the fittest, whoever is the most vicious, whoever works the hardest. We don't believe that. We believe that everything belongs to the Lord. I want to take you through history of giving. Very briefly, very fast. In the Old Testament, we see, before Moses' law, we see Abraham tithing to Melchizedek. What is tithing, by the way? We're going to talk more about that. Whenever you hear the word tithe, it just means 10%. This is something God instituted in the Old Testament to provide for His own work. Along with the Moses law, we see in Leviticus 27, Deuteronomy 12, and Deuteronomy 14 that God instituted 3 ways of giving. Now, the misunderstanding is that in the Old Testament, people only gave 10%. It's not correct. There were twice 10% and one-third of a tithe. So, in essence, in the Old Testament, God made a law that His people were going to pay 23.3% of their net increase, of their fields increase, of their income. Plus, on top of these tithes, they had to give offerings, free will offerings and other offerings. sin offerings that came later on. So, why did God do this? What was the point of this? Why did he say, of your increase 10% of this, of your increase 10% of that, plus another 3.3% of the other? Why did God do this? What did he do with this? It was like a tax to people, pretty much. They took all this, and they took it, the people took it to the Levites. God made it so that there was only one group of people that would do the ministry of worship, and those group of people didn't work. God did not give them land. He said that the other people will support this group of people. So he set this system up, and he told them, even the Levites, those received the tithe, he said, you're going to tithe too. One thing I want to get your attention to is this. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, when God is instructing them about the tithe, one key point that is there, that he says, when you cross over, this is the instructions before they cross over to the promised land. He says, when you cross over, wherever your land is, that's where you're going to use the tithe. What does that mean to us? That means you will use your tithe in the local church, in New Testament terminology. That's what it means. So if you're going to give in the Old Testament, God had told you to give in your local church. There's a lot of people that do give, but they don't give much to their own local church, and they give everywhere else. Local church should be priority. And then, if we look at Malachi chapter 3, we see how important giving was to God. He took it very seriously. Malachi 3:8 begins by saying, can a person rob God? You're indeed robbing me. But you say, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You're bound for judgment because you're robbing me. This whole nation is guilty, the Lord says. Bring the entire tithe into the storehouse so that there may be food in my temple. Test me in this matter, says the Lord of heaven's armies, and see if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing for you until there is no room to fit it all. God took it so seriously that if you don't give the way I want you to, he said, I will not bless you. You will not increase. But if you do give the way I want you to, I will bless you so much that you won't know what to do with. If that's not enough, he said, test me in this. This is the only place in the scriptures you see him saying, test me. Everywhere else, we are told not to test the Lord. This one area, he says, because how stubborn and prideful we are, he says, test me and you will see. If you're going to test the Lord, test him in this way. I recommend. Do it. You will see that he will bless you. Not only that, he says, then I will also stop the plague running over your crops, and you will not lose your fields. So God used the tithe to support the local ministry in the Old Testament. How about the New Testament? We're children of the New Testament, right? Jesus came to complete the Old Testament. How does God work? Now that he set up the system in the Old Testament, he set up the example, he gives a further example in himself in the New Testament. John 3:16, as you know, says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. shut that off in any way? No? We'll try this way. So God loved the world. I'm afraid to speak now. So much that he gave his one and only Son. He set the example by doing this. So, since he gave us all of himself, what are we to do? Romans 8:32. Indeed, he who did not spare his own Son, and gave him for us all, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish. I'm going to read 8:32 again. Indeed, he who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also give us all things? What's the message here? The message is this. God gave us all of himself, and he expects the same from us. In light of what he's done, Romans 12:1, as we went through a few weeks ago. Therefore, Paul says, I exhort you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a sacrifice, living, holy, pleasing to God, which is your reasonable service. Since God has done this, he has forgiven us. And in order to forgive us, he gave up his life on the cross in the form of his Son. Since he's given us so much, what are we to do? This goes beyond money. And there is the story of Timothy, who was a 6-year-old boy who started attending, he didn't come from a religious background, he started attending a Sunday school. About 2-3 years later, he realized that he needed to come to faith. He needed to accept the Lord, and he realized that there was sinfulness he needed to deal with. Even at that early age, he was able to comprehend this. And then he committed his life, his young life, to Jesus, and he was sitting through Sunday service, and they were passing the plate. And then as the plate came, he picked it up, went to the side of the aisle, and the usher that was trying to collect the plate went next to him, only to find him standing in the plate. He said, "What are you doing?" Timothy said, "I don't have any money to give, but I give all of myself to the Lord. I'm offering myself," he said. There is a cute story, but a really true example of the right heart towards the Lord. That starts with understanding that it's not our money. It's him who gives it to us. He's given us so much. If we give it to him the way he wants us to, he will bless us even more. That's the understanding of New Testament giving. And that brings us to our core body of scriptures, which is 2 Corinthians chapter 9. There are physical laws on earth, as you know. Low gravity, what goes up must come down. There are spiritual laws created by God also. And one of that I'm about to share with you. The person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. The person who sows generously will also reap generously. This is a spiritual law. You cannot get away from it. Try it and you will see. And there is more explanations of it in other scriptures. But on this spiritual law, God adds the attitude of the heart too. He says, this is the truth. If you want to reap a lot, you have to sow a lot. Okay. Each one of you should do this just as you decided in your heart. Not only we should do this, but attitude of the heart is the second most important part. If I can give millions of dollars to the Lord, and if I don't do it with the right heart, it's meaningless. Heart, you know how we always say, it's more important why we do something in front of God than what we do a lot of times. Same here. Why are we giving to the Lord? That's something we have to work out within ourselves. But each one of you should give just as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly. I don't want to do this, but I have to. No. If that's the heart, don't give. God doesn't need that kind of money. God doesn't need money, period. But we get to give. We get to be blessed. Not reluctantly, not under compulsion. Why? Because God loves a certain kind of a giver. The word over here in English is cheerful giver. In Greek, it's the word hilarious. When I say hilarious, what do you think? That's the word in Greek. They didn't want to translate it as hilarious giver because it would be misunderstood. But that's the attitude. You should be so joyful and just overwhelmed with joy and say, of course, here. That's the kind of giver God wants. That's the attitude of the heart. But what happens as an end result? Spiritual law is you sow more, you reap more. Attitude of the heart, hilariously giving. So what's the end result of this? We're told in so many different ways. And God is able to make all grace overflow to you so that because you have enough of everything in every way in all times, even that is a mouthful, you're going to have enough of everything in every way all the time. Think about what that means to your life right now. Enough of everything in every way all the time. You're not going to go with any kind of deficits in your life. You're going to have enough food. You're going to have enough clothes. You're going to have enough shelter. And you're going to have it all the time. You don't have to worry if I'm going to have enough food tomorrow, enough clothes tomorrow, if I'm going to have a shelter. No, you're going to have it. You will overflow in every good work. And because you have all this, you're going to do so much good works. Verse 10 continues, now God who provides the seed for the sower and bread for food will provide and multiply your supply of the seed. That means whatever you're sowing, because you're sowing generously, He's going to give you more of it so you can sow even more of it. And will cause the harvest of your righteousness to grow. And more you do this, with a hilarious heart, joyfully, more He's going to give you a blessing. And more blessing He gives you, more good works you can do with it. And then your righteousness will increase more and more. Continuous end result, verse 11. You will be enriched in every way so that you may be generous in every occasion. Can you imagine? Every time you want to tip somebody, you can tip so much more than anybody else. Every time you see a need, you can give in a way that changes their lives. Only way to get there is to have the right heart, a right understanding, and right giving, which is producing through us thanksgiving to God. And when you act this way, when you become this generous person that blesses others and His word, so many people are going to be blessed and thank God for you. it's what you call a win-win situation. You can't lose on this one. And God says, test me on this. What are you afraid of? Test him. What do you think? God's afraid? Oh my goodness. What if she tests me and I can't give her enough? No. Do it. Be a hilarious giver. Jesus says, just so that we understand, a lot of people say, well, New Testament doesn't talk about tithing. Okay, this is what Jesus says. Give, it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, it will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use will be measured for you. You want to give 10%? Okay. You want to give 20%? Okay. You want to give 50%, 60, 90? There are people. You guys know the big company Caterpillar. They make construction equipment. You know how that company started? In poverty, with a believer who decided from get-go. He said, a certain portion of my company's profits I'm going to give to the Lord. It came to a point, that's not owned by the same people right now, but it came to a point right before these original owners sold this company for multi-millions of dollars. They were giving 95%, and only 5% was more than enough for them. So that's the standard of New Testament. That's the expectation of God who's given his Son all of himself. Jesus also says in Acts 20, it is more blessed to give than to receive. It's better to be able to give than to receive. You get more blessing when you give than you receive. Proverbs 11:24 underlines the promise. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. He is generous to God. Generous, not generous in the bar with your friends. Please don't misunderstand me. Okay? This is not about picking up a bar tab or spending on your clothes. This is not what we're talking about. This is generosity in God's work. Generosity in righteousness. Generosity towards the needy. Generosity towards your local church. One person gives freely, generously, hilariously, yet gains even more. God gives that person more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. The other one doesn't want to give, calculates, well, what if I do this, and if I do this? And they come to poverty anyway. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will himself be refreshed. Honor the Lord, Proverbs 3 says, with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled and overflowing. So what's all these scriptures? There's more I can read off here. But what does this mean to us? Do you believe these promises of God? Ball is in your court. Ball is in my court. God is watching. 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the world, that he might strongly support those whose heart is completely his. He is looking for people to bless. Are you one of those people? Do I have the right heart? Do I have the right intentions? Am I a hilarious giver? Joyful? Test them. Mark 12, we see a scene right before Jesus is arrested. Jesus sat down, he is in Jerusalem, opposite the place where the offerings were put, and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in to the treasury more than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty. But in everything, all she has done will live on." God is watching. Jesus, Son of God, did not see all the millionaires that were putting in millions of dollars, let's call it, into the treasury. He noticed this woman who gave sacrificially. He says, okay, all these people are giving out of their abundance. Okay, but this woman wanted to serve the Lord so much that even though she didn't have enough, she still gave something. And that's what he wants. That kind of a heart. To take him seriously. To trust him with our future. So who should give? Everybody. Do you have any kind of money coming in to your hand, to your pocket, to your bank account? You should give. Whether you're working, you're not working, you're a student, you're a businessman, you're an employee, doesn't matter. If you have money coming in, if you're increasing in any way, you must give to the Lord. How much? That's up to you. You decide. In light of these scriptures, God's promises, you decide how much. You want to be blessed, you give more. You want to be more blessed, give in even more. Where should you give? Giving should be most importantly, to the local church. Just as it was in the Old Testament, that's how it is in the New Testament. Because this is where we come as a church family. This is where we come to learn, to share, to worship. What does the church do with this money? Usually a lot of people don't want to give because they don't know what happens with the money. Well, every year we have a report where the money goes. We don't have to pay for pastors. Narcissus and I do this voluntarily. We do have missionaries. We support a lot of churches. We support different kinds of organizations. Lord willing, as money comes in more, we will support more other endeavors. I'm looking into a few other things. The electric bill has to be paid. Insurance bill has to be paid. There's a lot of bills that need to be paid. Where does this come from? This comes from people's offerings. And then we do help people that are in need. If you have any specific questions as to what happens with the money that's given, please see us about it. We don't have anything to hide. Everything is out in the open. There are no secrets. Everything is there. Look, generations before you given so much that they were able to buy a building. And because of that, we were able to buy this building without having any debt. How did that happen? That happened through other people giving. You have so many churches, you see, they're crumbling, they're going down. They have to close their doors because they can't pay their rent or mortgage, yet God has blessed us with this. We don't have to worry about any of that. How did that happen? Because other people gave. Again, how much you give is up to you. A lot of people use the Old Testament, 10% as a starting point. and continue from there. But unless you are a hilarious giver, don't give. If you're not doing it willingly, if your heart is half in it, if you're not sure, don't give. God doesn't need our money that way. But we need to give because we need Him to bless us. And He will. And again, I want to close with this. Test Him in this. See what happens. Why? Because we're called to be the light to the world. By trusting Him, just trusting that we're going to be okay. Giving generously, helping generously, serving generously. Everybody must give. Even if you're serving, you give. I can't say because I'm preaching I'm not going to give. No. I have to give. Somebody's singing. They say, I'm singing, I'm not going to give. No, you have to give. The other one's doing the camera. I'm doing the camera. I'm helping. You have to give. You do. You don't have to. It's up to you. But I think you should. Like I said in the beginning, I don't know who gives, who doesn't give. I don't know who gives how much. I have no idea. But if you don't, remember these verses. Take it to heart. And take God's challenge. See how He moves in your heart. Talk to some seasoned believers who's gone through life. Ask them, have you tested the Lord in this? Did He bless you? You'll be surprised of the answers. On that note, God bless you.